Hi, welcome to the Power of Care Spotlight. I'm Larry Moliterno with Meridian Community Care. Here today with Carlton Sears, who's the Executive Director of our local Mahoning County and Youngstown library system. Thank you for being here today.
Glad to be here.
Well, first of all, I want to talk, I know you're real involved with the library, but before we talk about that, I want to get a sense of your involvement with something called the Harwood Institute.
My involvement with Harwood Institute probably goes back 6 or 7 years. You actually introduced it to me when we were doing strategic planning. And what they're really about is making hope real that people have for their communities, the aspirations they have for making it the kind of community they want to live in. And they've developed a framework where you can actually do that. And it's working around understanding what people really matters to them, listening to them, their aspirations, the concerns, the thing they struggle with, and then aligning the work you do with their aspirations.
It's really interesting because in the counseling side, we do a lot with individual stages of change. And we train folks in motivational interviewing, which is helping people understand what those stages are and how they move through those stages of individual change. And actually, what Harwood talks about is a very similar kind of thing for communities. And I think being in Youngstown, we have to look at that and say, wow, there are stages of change and we can't do it. It's not going to happen overnight. But there are stages.
Change takes place over time, and Harwood's actually been able to discern in the 25 years they've been doing this work that communities go through 5 stages. They're predictable. Every community goes through them. And if you understand the stage you're in, the capacity you have to change, it informs the strategies that you take to execute to move to the next level.
And let's just, if we can, I know one of the things that Richard Harwood did years ago in a study, I think it was with the Mott Foundation, and he looked at Youngstown, and he called it, he did a study and he called it Youngstown, a community in the waiting place.
Right,
and the waiting place is actually the first stage.
It's the first stage, and you move out of that stage into something called impasse, and you got to get through impasse to get to catalytic. But what this depends upon is having certain things in place. You have to have trusted leaders. That's obvious, you know, how deep and broad are your trusted leaders. You have to have places where people come together and talk about the issues, because you have to name a problem before you can take action on it. To the extent that people have a shared sense of purpose and where they want to go, that's important. These are all, there's 9 actual public capital factors, and depending upon the degree you have them, it really informs how you execute strategies to move forward.
And there is information on the website, on the Harwood website, that talks about what those stages of change are. And one of the things that I have found interesting, if you look at what's happening in our community, they talk about how there's good works being done by little pockets of people, and then very organically those pockets kind of start talking to each other, and there's a synergy that kind of happens.
There's a thing called pebble theory of change, where a lot of times people say, let's do one big thing, but it's hard to pull off one big thing when you don't have, for example, deep trusted leaders and a common sense of purpose. So it's really talking about taking those small pockets of change, replicating them, building a sense of hope that things can change, reinforcing that change, and then moving on to the next step incrementally. And before you know it, you're out of the waiting place and you're into catalytic, which is a much more hopeful place. The other thing that happens through that process is you have narratives in community. Some people say, well, nothing will ever change. But then on the other hand, you have small pockets of change. You need to lift up and reinforce and celebrate those good things that are happening.
I think that's a great, and I think especially for a community like the Mahoning Valley, because I think that we look at what's happened over the last, I don't know, I guess 30, 40 years since the steel mill's closed, and we need to have people understand that there's a need for optimism, and if we look at this system, we can recognize that by making these incremental steps, we can actually move forward as a community.
And besides the need for optimism, there's a reason for it.
Right.
There's a lot of good things happening here, and part of the problem is some people see those good things, other people don't see those things. So right now there's a little bit of a competition in narratives about what our community is going through. A lot of what Harwood is trying to do is reinforcing all those positive narratives, lifting them up, and helping organizations to make good on the aspirations they have to do good in the community.
Well, and I think one of the things that Harwood talks about is we can take the approach of looking back at the way things were. We can really talk optimistically about what our future holds for us. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about what Richard Harwood has done, and I think there'll be more information very soon that more people in the community might be able to get involved in this process.
And yes, there will be. Yeah.
I'm Larry Moliterno for the Power of Care Spotlight.